And he was saying, here you've got ISIS just rampaging through Iraq and through Syria. And all these world capitals are talking about this topic. But it brings up a really, really good question. Who would win a contest to be named America's most worthless Mideast ally? And I loved how he said it. Competition is fierce, but 3 countries are clear forerunners. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Israel. Yes. And those 3 together, each one, and he just tears each one a new one.
Yeah, he does.
It's brilliant.
He brings up a few really good points that I like. Number one is, and this would be an argument I would say for why we have to at least consider action there, is when he brings up Saudi Arabia, he says in quotes, what do the Saudis do with their shiny F-16s and spanking new tanks? One might have hoped to see Saudi forces in action against ISIS, which really hasn't had any success against a military formation that hasn't been systematically trained and adequately armed. But this isn't happening, probably because the Saudi leaders realize that a great many Saudis, a majority in question mark parentheses, actually agree with ISIS's ideology, and there's no guarantee that they wouldn't defect to ISIS if called upon to battle, which that alone, if there is an argument for why we should be considering intervention or at least watching what's going on there, it would be that a wealthy country like Saudi Arabia may have a good majority of people who do believe in the tenets of ISIS and want to subscribe to that, and therefore they wouldn't be able to fight as well as they think they would as a unified country.
ISIS wants Mecca, right? I mean, they have ambitions. They have regional ambitions, right? And so how are the Saudis dealing with this? Like you were saying, what are they doing? What would they even be able to do if they tried? We don't know. I mean, they gobble up tons of our stuff, right?
And if you think about it from their point, if I was a political pundit in Saudi Arabia, one thing I would be pushing for would be, I don't know if it would be a good idea for us to make a necessary staunch line in the sand at this point. I know that sounds irrational to us all the way over in the West, but the reason is because there is a good majority of Saudi Arabians who may hold those tenets of ISIS to be true and rather fight for them than fight for the Saudis, fight for the country of Saudi Arabia. And so if you draw a line in the sand, you're basically saying now you have to choose a side. And I think they may be worried about what the repercussions of that would be.
Right, because there are so many people in Saudi Arabia who happen to believe things that agree with ISIS. I mean, and Saudi Arabia, and this is the weird thing. I mean, because Saudi Arabia is an ally of ours, right, geopolitically. But when you talk about the people of Saudi Arabia themselves, right, and what their beliefs are, they're pretty radical, right? In fact, they're the most radical of all the different Muslim nations, right? I mean, this is the most radical of the bunch, and so they're kind of in a tough spot too, especially a tough spot, I guess, and they're not going to move. Turkey, right? Turkey, they're a member of NATO. Right? I mean, they're at a very strategic place, right? The article was talking about bridging Asia and Europe, right? It has a considerable middle class, millions of educated and highly trained citizens, and they've got this aggressive extremist Sunni movement beheading people. Mm-hmm. And what do they do? What do they do? They're where are they? What is the urgency for them, and why are they choosing to deal with other things, right? Yes. Other dangers, right? The one they're focusing on now has to do with the Kurdish minority. Yes. So you say they're focusing on something else, and the bigger question, I guess, that arises from that is, what should this tell us about the threat, right? And same thing with Israel, and finish up with Israel, because this is where I loved before the show. We're sitting there, we do our thing before the program, getting ready. We have this banter going back and forth. We're studying, we're looking at different topics and trying to get quotes and the like. And he's going through, and he just stops, and he's like, "Bro, Israel." He's like, and so just
okay,
yeah.
So this is I'm going to preface it by what McConnell had said about Israel, because I think he did a really good job about it. He said, once again, events illustrate what utility Israel has had as a regional ally when crunch comes. Faced with unforeseen, rapidly moving, and dramatic crises, Americans watch as Israel does absolutely nothing except antagonize the Muslim world further by announcing new land seizures so more illegal settlements can be built in Jerusalem. Of course, this isn't without precedent. Israel was of no help in the first Iraqi crisis, and of course no help in the second, beyond providing a parade of primetime cheerleaders to encourage George W. Bush to lurch into war, which is exactly right. This is a country that is in the Middle East that already has a line drawn in the sand ideologically. They're not like Saudi Arabia, and they're not like Turkey, where there is already an ideological difference between this country and the others, and they hold Western values to be their moral compass in Israel. And if that's the case, they are the closest, most prudent ally for us in the Middle East that we could rely on. The thing is, they're not there. They don't exist. Israel is not anywhere to be seen. They don't even have to abide by our nuclear arms treaties. They could possibly have more nuclear weapons than we do. They're not in the UN. Israel is unabatedly the most militaristically organized country in the Middle East, and they hold different ideological values, and they will do nothing. And that puts them, to me, at the forefront of being to blame for lack of intervention.
You know, nobody expects Israel to be involved. And that's the weird thing for me. I mean, we just watched the military domination of Palestine and Gaza, right? We watched the entire world was witnessing the military escapades of Israel and their domination in that region to say, look, you can't touch us. Try shooting a missile, kaboom, we knock it out of the sky. You ain't gonna hurt us. And they have that kind of power. They have that kind of weaponry. They have that kind of money from the United States, and yet their involvement is little more than the talking head circuit on Sunday mornings, you know, to come over here and to remind us about the Holocaust and how America was necessary for World War II and we need the leadership of America right now in much the same way. And then they walk away. Yeah. You know, and I said this before the show, I'll say it again. They're not in the concentration camps anymore. They have freaking nukes. Right? They have a nation. They have a government. They have a military, one of the strongest militaries. They have some of the best military technology in the entire world, in all of human history. They have much of this. And yet, the way that they're peddling this entire thing about American obligation, it would seem as if we're right back in the haze of war of World War II. You know, and you sit there and you say, times have changed, so has Israel. Right? So is Israel. Why don't you buck up? Why don't you be involved in this? You know, why not Turkey? Why not Saudi Arabia? Why not the regions and states and nations that have good reason to actually be terrified, right? Terrified of the barbarians at the gates because they're there, right? They are there, and yet they're coming and they're knocking on our door and saying you need to get involved. What really did it for me with this piece by McConnell was this, and I'll just quote him at length, and I absolutely love this. I encourage people, please go check it out. It's called "The Middle East Doesn't Matter. Neither ISIS nor any of America's fair-weathered allies are worth the price of the U.S.'s deepening regional commitments." Scott McConnell. But he says this. He said, and I might even do an extended quote, so give me a minute. Might there be a silver lining in all this? As we witness the emergence of a violent new force, simple realism forces upon us the fact that the friends we've been wooing for decades just don't see it that way. They may not like ISIS, but for various reasons, they have other fish to fry. That should tell us something about the strategic vision underlying our policies for the past 2 or 3 decades. But here's where it ends, and this is where it's good. What silver lining? Because he mentioned, is there a silver lining in this? What silver lining? It's rooted in the fact that the Mideast may now actually matter much less than we think it does. Right? We do have the option of pretty much ignoring it if we choose. Its contribution to the world economy is negligible. Its oil will reach the markets one way or another. The security and well-being of the American people is not linked to the survival of a Shiite regime in Baghdad, a medieval monarch in Riyadh, or, for that matter, a Jewish state in Jerusalem. Recognition of this fact is only beginning to seep into the discourse. Justin Logan argues persuasively here, and he has a link, that virtually nothing that goes on in the Mideast can threaten us very much, that no country in the region is worth starting a war over, and that the amount of money we've spent combating terrorism in the region is wildly disproportionate to the actual threat.
Exactly.
There it is. There's the hammer. Like, yes, there is the hammer. Do we really need to be all wrapped up in this? Does it need to concern us at all? And I'm with McConnell. I have no hesitancy whatsoever in telling everybody. I'm with McConnell. The Mideast can screw itself in many ways, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, obviously, diplomatically, I would still think that the United States should be involved. I think we should be diplomatically involved all over the place. I'm not an isolationist on that score. But when it comes to military intervention, no way. I forget who it was, Joe, but somebody said, too, just recently, that there's no reason why we couldn't just go in. It might have been Sam Harris, in fact. There's no reason why we couldn't just go in and take care of this or be involved in this in a way that doesn't involve the military whatsoever. And, in fact, that has to do with the SEALs or the Rangers or any of these other groups, that they could do it, and that it really shouldn't even concern much of what we do over here and what we talk about over here.
Well, and the issue I have with having even the SEALs be involved in it is that provides such a shadow cover, and it's an obvious involvement by our government to the people that live there, where they would still feel provoked by the West. I think removing the threat of provocation from us as Western society is a huge thing that would lead to better safety for us. I truly believe that. Less meddling in the affairs of other countries, less intervening between sovereign nations, less flying our military vehicles in sovereign airspace. I think that those are answers to issues of radical Islam or just radical terrorism. It's answers to people like ISIS. Especially if their countries that are surrounding them are not willing to deal with them at this point, then why are we going to fly 12,000 miles across the world to get to them and do this for them? Why? Why us? Why send our poor to fight the rich man's war over there? Why do it? And when I say rich man's war, I'm talking about every time we go to war, there is an incentive for money, because every single metal machine that goes out there to kill people makes a buck for somebody. Halliburton makes big money when we go to war. But all that aside, that's a separate argument for being an interventionist. But the purest one would be, it doesn't affect our safety right now. It does not affect our safety. And until it does, we don't have a right and we don't have a reason to be involved there. Period.
We have just cause for ignoring it.
Yes.
We have just cause for ignoring it, for telling them we don't need to get involved in this. This is your religious infighting. This is your geopolitical infighting, whatever, but it's not our business. And most importantly, it's not our business yet, right? I'm more opposed to the idea that we lead the charge, right? That the United States has to be the one to grab the bull by the horns and say, we're going to go ahead and do this. If anything, we should be late to the party. I think we should do like we did maybe in World War II. I think being late to the party. I know that a lot of people might say, whoa, that sounds terrible. That's what we did. And even after being late to the party, they still come to us now, and we are the ones who came in and helped to fix things and to make things right, and that they want us to be the ones to lead the charge from here on out. I don't think that should be our role whatsoever. I think that we have every reason right now to very comfortably sit back and say, I don't mean to sound really terrible to you, but we're very comfortable waiting until things get much worse for you, right? To the point where at least you are doing something on your own, where you're recognizing it as a threat worthy enough even for your own to take up and to fight and say, now we need your help. We're fighting. We're showing you how serious we are about this. We want your assistance and support. Because America's been leading the way for a long time on a lot of things, and it hasn't been good, right? It hasn't been good. It hasn't been good for our economy. It hasn't been good for the way we're viewed around the world, right? And it seems like this kind of lead-the-way interventionism, it fits the definition that so many people give for insanity, that we just keep doing the same thing and saying over and over and over, and we expect the result to be that the world is going to love that we led the way in this. But we lead the way in something, and then people clamor and say, well, it was a bad decision, it was a bad move, look, you guys are doing it on your own, who are you, you're not the world police. And it's a terrible, terrible situation that I think can be remedied by simply saying, you honestly, at this moment, you are not worth our time. Not militarily, right? And not doling out buku bucks for this. You're worth our time diplomatically. If you want to talk to us, if you want us involved in your strategy, however that is, that would be worthy of our time, worthy of our money, worthy even of our sacrifice. Beyond that, as of right now, if you don't find it to be a big deal and the barbarians are at your gate, then we shouldn't find it a big deal when we're across the Atlantic and on the other side of the Pacific, either which way you go.
I agree. No, I agree entirely. I think that we'd have to see some action by the surrounding countries first before we should be intervening. The idea of, well, you broke it and you got to buy it, right? I disagree with that entirely. There are many, many reasons why the Middle East is in turmoil, and a lot of them have to do with religion, a lot of them have to do with lack of resources, and those are two things that have been there long before American intervention was there. Long before 1950, Sunni, Shiite, and Kurds were fighting for territory and space in the Middle East. And long before American interventionism, there was plenty of infighting over just resources, areas of space, where they can allocate these resources. Those are things that have been going on across the world, let alone in just the Middle East. And we cannot solve all these problems, especially with bullets and bombs.
Bullets and bombs hardly solve anything.
Ever.
I mean, they just don't. They are. I guess they're good for destabilization.
Yes.
Right, and demoralizing a group.
Well,
that makes sense, right? But as an end game, that if we just bomb enough, this is going to magically from the bombs, wondrous things are going to arise. Mm-hmm. That's mythical thinking.
It is mythical. People think the bomb is the end of the story, right? We're going to bomb them, boom, it's over. But actually, bombing is a transition if you're writing a story. It's a transition from one story to another. Perhaps you've ended something, but you began a whole nother campaign. One misplaced bomb that blows up one house that's full of innocent people could produce 20, 30 anti-Western fighters. One bomb misplaced. The repercussions for that are so great that they're not worth executing. You can't bomb ideas. You can't shoot ideas. And there's no way of bombing it out of the Middle East.
And they don't go away like bad guys.
Absolutely.
Right? Like you were saying last week or the week before, that there's this kind of idea that runs through our culture that if we just go and bomb the bad guys, that they'll disappear. And it's begging the question to assume that there's just a bunch of really good people that won't get bombed, and that once the bad guys are bombed and they're all gone, that vacuum will just be filled by the good guys that are left because the bad guys are all dead. Right? And that's kind of, I mean, in reality, that's kind of a pop foreign policy perspective in the United States, in a wildly popular one, right?
Yeah.
It just is.
We've heard people say that ignorant, well, for lack of better terms, just ignorant shit. Oh, just go bomb them. Turn the place into a parking lot, right? People that say that sort of stuff have no clue about the repercussions of serious actions. There are people that I think really hold that to be true, which is sadistic and sad, but they do think that's the answer. That is not how you do it. It's like a dry erase board. You might be able to erase a few off. That's going to produce more. There's going to be more people coming up to fight for one innocent life than there will be for the amount of bad people you think there are in the world. There will always be people who want to right a wrong, and bombing typically produces more wrongs than rights.
And as with the dry erase board, so with reality, that there's a residue left. Even if you erase it, if there are people who strongly believe that the words up on that board should always be there, you can erase it, but you have that faint outline of the letters that remains on those dry erase boards, and people can go and just rewrite over those letters again or rewrite the same letters. Reality is a difficult and complex thing. Speaking of difficult and complex, though,